Good morning, class. Yesterday, you got the opportunity to look at segregation in the United States. Hopefully, as you looked at those pictures, you got a feel for what it was like to be an African American during the Jim Crow era. African Americans were denied equal rights and opportunities. African Americans coming home from World War II are really going to be disgruntled with the Jim Crow era laws and are going to start fighting back against them. We are going to look today at the early parts of the Civil Rights Movement from 1945 into the 1950s, focusing today's lesson on the Brown versus Board of Education court case. The early Civil Rights Movement. After World War II, African American soldiers who had been over in Europe fighting for the United States came home to the same Jim Crow and inequality that they had faced before going. Keep in mind that African Americans, while they were fighting, fought next and died next to white soldiers in Europe. In many European nations, when they fought with their soldiers, they were treated equally. It wasn't until they were placed back with the United States troops that they felt the segregation happen again. Again, they're going to come home to the segregation, voting discriminations, and no jobs. Because of this, the soldiers ended up helping push for civil rights and were able to get some civil rights legislations passed. In 1948, Truman desegregates the military and ends discrimination in hiring for federal jobs. Also in 1952, Eisenhower continues with Truman's actions towards hiring discriminations and banning those. Local and state governments also begin to help with civil rights movement by passing laws banning racial discrimination in public housing. These were just a few things that happened in the 1945s to 1950s. Some other civil rights events that were happening in that time frame was a formation of CORE, or Congress of Racial Equality. This was created in 1942. It was a nonviolent organization. However, it was founded in the North, mainly of white middle class people. Eventually, it will move down to the South and provide training for African Americans to use the nonviolent methods in civil rights protest. Jackie Robinson also, in 1947, was drafted into the Major League Baseball League. This was the first time that an African American played in the major leagues. He basically was chosen to help integrate baseball. He faced a lot of hardships, harassment, and death threats for his actions in playing with white baseball players. Another organization that comes into effect, especially in the 1940s, but has been around since 1909, was the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP. The NAACP is the largest and most powerful civil rights organization. They fought discrimination and segregation through the courts. That was their goal, was to use the Supreme Court to change the Constitution. Thurgood Marshall was a young African American lawyer at the time, and he was the head of the law team that was going to challenge the legality of segregation in the courts. He becomes a key player for the NAACP and the civil rights movement. Some of the early cases that Thurgood fought were Gaines versus Canada in 1938. Here, the Supreme Court stated that each state has to provide an equal school facility within the state board or allow African Americans to attend the all-white school. Keep in mind that these are at a college level. Sweat versus Painter was another case. This was dealing with the University of Texas Law School. The African American law school was considered inferior to the white law school. And so the case went before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court stated that separate law schools hurt black students, and therefore graduate schools need to be integrated. The McLaurin versus Oklahoma State Regents also dealt with higher education, stating that separating blacks and white students in college classes and other areas was unconstitutional. So in order to get away around the Sweat versus Painter case, what a lot of colleges would do would be allow for African Americans to be part of the white school, but would take separate classes than the white students. All of this is going to lead up to one of the most significant court cases in the civil rights movement. This is the Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. We talked earlier about the Plessy versus Ferguson case and how that was the case that allowed for segregation or the separate but equal facilities. The Brown versus Board of Education is going to be the case that overturns the Plessy case. Basically, the Brown versus Board of Education was a compilation of 3 different lawsuits. The Supreme Court agreed to hear them, but all lumped under the one case. The one that they had chosen was the Brown versus Board of Education. The case dealt with a little girl named Linda Brown who had to attend an African American school that was far away from her home. She was in elementary school, so the walk would have been quite substantial. Closer to her house was an all-white school that she would prefer to have been able to go to. The NAACP tried to enroll her into this white school, but she was denied entrance. Thurgood Marshall takes the case up to the Supreme Court, and one of his major arguments for the case and why it is that African Americans should attend the white schools is that segregation is harmful to self-image. He was able to successfully argue this as the courts ruled that separate but equal doctrine in schools is unconstitutional and therefore is illegal. One of the quotes that is the most well known from Chief Justice Earl Warren was to separate from others of similar age solely because of their race generates a feeling of inferiority as to their status in the community. Basically, he argued that separate but equal is not equal because it causes an inferiority amongst the African American children. There were many reactions to this case. For African Americans, this was a big deal. This was one giant step into equality and the civil rights. This is going to be the stepping stone for future civil rights movements. If you talk to white Southerners, there's going to be a mixture of excitement or lack thereof. Most white Southerners were not going to be happy with the decision. Some, especially in the border states, just went along with the decision without fighting it. If you lived in the Deep South, they were not going to allow for desegregation of schools, and they resisted desegregation. We also see in the Deep South the increase of Ku Klux Klan activities. Overall, few schools in big cities and border states admitted few African American students. So after 1954, what we find is that there really isn't a big change in desegregation of schools. African American students were still attending all black schools, while white students were attending all white schools. Most places in the South did not even move towards desegregation at all.